Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this is Many a True Nerd, and welcome to the Many a True Nerd Top 50 Games of all time, because recently I had a very dangerous thought, which is, okay, like, you know, all those games I've named as my Game of the Year over the last 10 years, like, how would I actually rank them against each other? And how would I compare those games, because my Games of the Year lists are only games that came out in that year, against, you know, older games that I've played since that are still absolute cocking classics? And how would I compare both of those to some of my favourite games that I played when I was younger? And, yes indeed, before I knew what was happening, I was starting to put together a list. A list where I tried to rank all of my favourite games, and after much deliberation, I'm going to share it with you. And I'm going to regret this because, oh blimey, this is probably going to upset some people. So, okay, before we begin, an important ground rule here, which is, I am not claiming that, like, you know, one game is objectively, whatever that means precisely, better than another, okay? This is a list of my favourite games. Now, you might be asking, John, how could that be the case when this is a ranked list and you're literally going to arrange the games in order of preference? And, okay, I don't really know. Like, I just stared at the list and rearranged it till my brain said, yeah, that looks about right. Sure, let's go with it. So, yeah, there's going to be one hell of a blend of games going on here. Screw it. Number 50, Bioshock from 2007. And Bioshock is a game that does almost everything right. It is stunning to look at, even today. And I don't just mean the graphics. I mean, arguably more importantly, the style of it. Rapture is one of the most instantly recognisable locations in all of gaming, filled with incredible Art Deco design and architecture. And it doesn't hurt that it gets introduced to the player in maybe one of the most famous and stunning intro sequences in all of gaming. But the real genius for me is how well Bioshock marries narrative and gameplay. Like, it's a solid shooter with some meaty guns, mixed in with some really fun RPG superpowers you can use in all sorts of creative ways, but it wouldn't work as well if Rapture itself wasn't so compelling to explore. In Bioshock, you're constantly pulled onwards, wanting to figure out what's happened here, wanting to meet the next creepy survivor who might want to chat or maybe just try and kill you, wanting to catch up with the latest person who's babbling in your ear at you over the radio, and trying to figure out what, if anything, you can do to either fix this society or just get out alive, which ultimately comes together in maybe one of the best and most famous plot twists in all of gaming history, which I won't spoil just in case you're one of the 10.5 people who's never played Bioshock, but oh, it's a wonderful, compelling game, and the only things stopping it from being much higher up this list are, for me at least, the little system moral choice feels a bit toothless, given you end up with basically the same amount of Adam, whether you harvest them or save them, and maybe the game runs out of steam a tiny bit towards the end, including a final boss that pretty much nobody likes that much. But even so, it's an incredible piece of work that does so much well. Number 49, Hades from 2020. And Hades is a game that proves that just sometimes game balance is boring and chaos is fun. Because Hades is a game that is wildly broken on occasion. Some of the combinations of weapons and powers you can get are so ludicrously overpowered you can just sit back and laugh as your enemies melt in a fireworks display. And that's good, because it's a roguelike, meaning you've only got that combination of tools for this one run, so why not make the odd combination ridiculously stupidly too strong and let the player have some fun with it? It also doesn't hurt the gamer happily lets you embrace a playstyle that works for you, from incredibly aggressive melee to literally running and dodging away and letting passive abilities do most of the work. There's something here for everybody, including a difficulty system that, if you choose to enable God mode, makes you stronger every time you lose, so you can make the game a lot easier that way. Or alternatively, you can whack up the heat mechanic and make the game almost impossibly difficult. Basically, you can get the experience you want out of Hades, and that's really bloody nice. On top of that, a lot of the heavy lifting is being done by the incredible and very horny character design, giving you a cast of support characters and adversaries that are all a pleasure to meet repeatedly and learn about. Hades is a very rare roguelike that makes looping around and around and around satisfying narratively as well as mechanically, as you slowly get to know everybody and occasionally have sex with them. It also doesn't hurt that, it's a classical mythology thing, and that's worth a few extra points from me. Number 48, Life is Strange from 2015, and, okay, Life is Strange is a really bloody weird franchise that, despite having, depending on how you count, 4 or 5 games in it at this point, has always failed to recapture the magic of that very first entry back in 2015. This is almost certainly my favourite of what used to be called Telltale-style games. Episodic narrative adventure McGibbles, and Life is Strange, to my mind, does a huge amount right. At times, it's very sweet and fluffy, and genuinely very heartfelt in how much it focuses its attention on the day-to-day life of 2 friends reconnecting, as well as the wider mystery plot. But, as you already know if you've played this game, blimey, it goes to, some sad and dark places too, like Chloe's fate in the alternative timeline. That is not something I'm ever going to forget. But what really made this game shine is that it wasn't just a solid narrative thing. The time travel mechanics made it a really fun puzzle game too, and the franchise has absolutely failed to find anything to replace time travel with in the subsequent games. But going back and forth in Life is Strange 1, trying to find the right way to intervene in the timeline, that was great fun, and you could use it to come up with all sorts of weird narrative stuff too, like a piece of information that you learn in one timeline could be very useful in another. And there was a lot of complexity here, way more than you might reasonably expect, and a lot more difficulty too. Like, in my first playthrough, I didn't pay enough attention to one of the secondary characters, and thus, in the end, I got someone killed, because I didn't know the right thing to say to save them. And I found that really bloody upsetting, and there are not that many games that could play with my emotions as well as this one did, and that's worth a lot to my mind. Number 47, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask from the year 2000, and okay, when it comes to, like, the N64 generation of Zeldas, most people fondly remember Ocarina of Time as being, the best game ever, etc, etc, and I will agree with you. Ocarina of Time, brilliant game, still solid, fantastic dungeon design, but I was told that of the 2 N64 Zeldas, it was Majora's Mask that was the star, and the one that's aged the best. Like, Majora's Mask was seriously a game vastly ahead of its time, with Clock Town and its 72-hour cycle still incredibly impressive even today, with a small town of people going about their lives, interacting with the world and each other, doing their jobs in the day, going to bars at night. It just created a world that felt very much alive, rather than just a collection of NPCs you went around and spoke to. Though of course one of the game's big features was the mask mechanic, and the impressive range of abilities from the mask was a great addition to the formula too. Rolling around at high speed as a Goron, flying with the Deku mask, swimming as a Zora, all fantastic. And the side activities, they were a big step up from many other Zelda games. Though, for me, the star of the show is the story. That's the bit that sticks with me from Majora's Mask the most. A surprisingly dark Zelda that repeatedly comes back to the theme of grief, letting go and passing on. Link is literally stepping into the shoes of departed characters to deal with their unfinished business for them. Hell, the world is even called Termina. The entire game is apocalyptic in tone, with the moon looming over you at all times. If you wander around Clocktown on the final night, the postman is sobbing in his house. Anju is sitting alone in her room, and Creamia lets her younger sister have a drink of Chateau Romani, knowing they're both about to cocky die as the haunting music of the final night plays. It's, a very, very dark place that Zelda never really went to again, and it really sticks with me. A real classic to my mind. Number 46, Starcraft from 1998, and okay, this one was difficult for me because probably overall, if I had to guess, I may well have played more StarCraft 2 than I ever did of StarCraft 1, but ultimately, I do always come back to StarCraft 1 as my favourite StarCraft campaign. Lacking the whole goodies versus ultimate darkness thing from StarCraft 2, StarCraft 1 is a much more grimy story of a bunch of folks who are all blatantly about to betray each other, you just don't know who's going to ultimately end up on top. And it's also got some brilliantly designed missions in it. New Gettysburg in the original StarCraft 1 campaign and Emperor's Fall and Brood War both come to mind immediately. But in all honesty, what brings this game here in this list is my own history with it, because I used to watch Starcraft 1 professional Starcraft matches back when that was, pretty hard to do if you weren't in Korea. This was, somewhere around 2006, 2007, where I stumbled across it on YouTube in the very early days, like, Flash, Boxer, J-Dong, all the old classics. This was just before Nick Plott became the very first English language Starcraft commentator, so back in those days there just wasn't any English language Starcraft content on YouTube, and at that time in my life I wasn't actually playing that many video games, but watching a bit of Starcraft 1 here and there kind of kept me into gaming, and when Starcraft 2 came out in 2010, that was one of the games that got me back into playing it more often. So basically, without Starcraft, maybe there wouldn't be a Many a True Nerd, and for that reason, it's always going to have a special place in my heart, damn it. Number 45, The Last of Us from 2013, and okay, this one is not particularly complicated. The Last of Us is, plain and simple, a masterclass in storytelling. At its core, it's an incredibly simple story. Two characters meet and they're travelling from point A to point B. But it's carried by the characters. And I don't just mean like, the script, the words they're saying, I mean the performances that bring it to life. The voice work and the animations too. Seeing Ellie and Joel at first not liking or even trusting each other, then coming to understand each other over time, coming to understand themselves too, and eventually opening up and helping each other with their own personal trauma, with all of it leading perfectly to an incredible finale that I'm not going to spoil here, but yeah. I'll say it's very fair that it's still regularly discussed right to this day. Of course, that's not to say the gameplay doesn't work beautifully as well. The guns and melee strikes feel viciously strong, and suits a game where the story and characters both go to some really vicious places. And the stealth works nicely as well, but at the end of the day, that tight focus on Ellie and Joel and their bond is what makes this game work. And to my mind, ultimately, why The Last of Us Part 2 and its much looser time and perspective hopping narrative just doesn't in the same way. But The Last of Us Part 1, that is a masterful piece of storytelling. Number 44, Beat Saber from 2018, and okay, so basically, there are two types of people in the world. Those of you who have played Beat Saber, who therefore agree with me, and those of you who have not tried out VR yet. And yes, those are indeed the only two options, because I literally cannot see a scenario where you have access to any sort of VR setup and you're not using it primarily for Beat Saber. Beat Saber is comfortably, by far, the best VR game that has ever existed. It's not even cocking close. And I'm aware that if you're unfamiliar with this game, it looks like all you do is hit boxes with a stick in the indicated direction, and I swear to you, in VR, it is an incredible experience. So damn compelling, and very conveniently, it's a great workout too, so okay, this is just something you've got to experience. If you've not played this, trust me, Beat Saber is marvellous. Number 43, BanjoKazooie from 1998, and okay, I will say, I think this is, got to be my personal favourite platformer from the golden age of 3D platformers. Though many others do prefer Super Mario 64, yes, this may be a very good example as to why this is my personal favourite list, because I freely admit to you, Banjo was my first ever 3D platformer. Alright, I played this before I played Super Mario 64, so, I'm going into this with nostalgia, rose-tinted spectacles, all the rest of it, and it's always going to have a special place in my heart. But I have played it plenty in more recent years, and I think it holds up really bloody well. Like, the level variety is great. From the single gigantic flooded room of Clanker's Cavern, to the floor is lava setup of a Bubble Gloop Swamp, and the final gigantic tree to climb in Click Clock Wood. Plus, within those levels, there's a lot to do outside of pure platforming, like Mr. Vile's viciously hard eating contest, the sledge racers, and all the new opportunities from Mumbo transforming you into another creature. And on top of that, the game includes what may be my favourite level of all cocking time, Treasure Trove Cove. A huge open island filled with puzzles to solve and bosses to fight, as well as introducing flight into the game, meaning you could just soar freely around, all accompanied by Grant Kirkhope's wonderful score that was so bloody memorable, it only just got brought back into Smash Bros. Ultimate the other year. So, yeah. I think Banjo's an absolute cocking classic. Number 42, SimCity 4 from 2003, and oh, SimCity 4, my utter beloved. This is another personal pick here because SimCity 4 was not only my first ever city builder, it was also one of my first ever PC games, full stop, and the scale of it, that's the thing. Particularly the genius decision to divide a single world map into squares that literally border each other. So when you start building a new city, if it borders an established neighbour, that could turbocharge your early development, and ultimately, when you add multiple developed cities all next to each other, they could, like, you know, trade utilities, meaning you could specialise entire cities towards supporting their neighbours in return for cash, and that feature alone kept me playing for years and years and years as you slowly filled up an entire cocking overworld, turning it into a sprawling megacity, occasionally nipping back into old cities to see the new demand flowing in, suddenly creating a gigantic economic boom, causing skyscrapers to spring into existence. It just, it felt so incredibly huge at the time, and honestly, I think it holds up really well today, even against the current generation of city builders. Like, fine, there's loads of nice quality of life features available today, but there's just something magical about SimCity 4. Number 41, Soma from 2015, and okay, this one's probably going to be a surprise because this didn't even win my Game of the Year back in 2015, but this is one of those games that I've really come to appreciate over the years. Like, this game has just gone up and up and up in my affection. So, okay, where to start with Soma? Like, let's put it this way. Many games are not quite as smart as they think they are. Like, you know, we can all think of examples of games that build their stories around big, interesting philosophical questions, but then don't actually have much to say about them. And Soma is the opposite. Soma is an incredibly smart game that, as I say, I've come to appreciate more and more over the years. So, you start off playing as some normal guy called Simon in the year 2015. You attend a doctor's appointment and you get your brain scanned, but then you black out and wake up 100 years later in the post-apocalypse, or rather, you don't. The Simon you were playing as died long ago. You're playing as the brain scan that's now been uploaded into a mechanical suit, but like, in terms of your mental state, you're identical to Simon. Personality, memories, everything that makes Simon Simon is inside the suit. So, are you Simon? And what does that mean when it comes to identity and humanity? And I'm not going to spoil what happens afterwards, but the game basically delights in showing you horrific scenarios that play with these ideas. And when I say horrific, I don't mean because, you know, they're gory or shocking in any particular way, but instead because they creep under your skin and ask you questions that don't really have, you know, any easy answers, leading ultimately to the game's climax, which, to my mind, may be the most horrifyingly dark moment I've ever cocking played through. Trust me, this one is great. A fantastic psychological horror game. Number 40, Deadly Premonition from 2010, and okay, Deadly Premonition is weird. Just look at it. This is the pause menu, okay? Deadly Premonition is just wonderful nonsense from start to finish, and completely, 100% should not work. It should not be good, but somehow it does, and it is. Like, you stumble from being chased through the woods by an axeman, to a puzzle involving squirrels, to an extended comic farce involving a sandwich, but it still works, because the game is aggressively committed to its own bizarre logic, or, I suppose, lack thereof. The soundtrack is cocking all over the place. The graphics are wildly uneven. It's basically incomprehensible, to the point where I'm not even sure if large parts of it are intentionally funny, or whether the humour was just an accident, but in either case, I love it anyway, because there is simply nothing else quite like it. Number 39, Freedom Fighters from 2003, and okay, Freedom Fighters is another game you maybe wouldn't expect on this list, but honestly, I think it's a forgotten classic from its generation. Like, as a third-person shooter, it plays with some really interesting and unique ideas that I've basically never seen any other game use since. So, Most importantly, rather than one single level, you're presented with a selection of interconnected playgrounds. To give a really simple example, you might enter one and find you're being attacked repeatedly by helicopters, but that's fine. You can move to the adjacent level and destroy the helicopter refueling point. That will ground the helicopters. But that level has got troop carriers and thus constantly respawning enemies. Now, you could stop the enemies respawning by blowing up a bridge, but that bridge is back in the first level, guarded by the helicopters. So basically, the difficulty was entirely dynamic. You had to figure out what you wanted to strike first, slowly peeling away layers of defences from adjacent areas, carefully considering how to make progress, but also giving you the freedom to just rush straight to the enemy headquarters if you were skilled enough to storm it at full strength. The game was really cocking wide open like that, and the levels, they were great too. Wide open adventure playgrounds, as you might expect, given this is the same team that had already made Hitman 1 and 2. And that's before I even get into a leveling system that rewarded your progress by letting you bring a bigger and bigger squad of allies with you into the missions. Some brilliantly chunky weapons that felt great to use, the shotgun and sniper rifle in particular, and a plot with a surprising amount of bite to it that rather presciently took aim at the dangers of propaganda and fake news. Just overall, a brilliant, brilliant game. Number 38, Knights of the Old Republic from 2003, and as you may know, I came to Knights of the Old Republic pretty bloody late. I only played it for the first time a few years ago, so basically, I went into it with zero nostalgia, no rose-tinted spectacles, nothing. Which makes me way more confident in saying this one really holds up beautifully, even 20 years later. Like, for me, it's the world building that really stands out. Every planet you visit is incredibly unique, and you spend enough time on each to really dig into them. Their history, who lives there, what's going on, how your choices might impact the locals and the wider galaxy. Plus, on top of that, the variety between them, both in terms of, mechanics and narrative, is fantastic. Tatooine is filled with wide open desert with dangerous streets in its one grimy city, whereas Manaan focuses overwhelmingly on a sensitive political crisis. Meanwhile, on Korriban, you're literally attending Evil Wizard Academy. And the funny thing is, it's a small game on paper. The actual amount of physical space on Korriban, for example, is tiny, but it never feels that way when you're playing it because the game does such a great job of creating the feel of a huge epic world. It's just an incredible conjuring trick. Add into that some really fun companions out to flesh out the galaxy, a morality system that actually works really well, given being evil can be hilariously fun, and being good feels noble rather than just mawkish, and of course, a solid Star Wars soundtrack, and oh yeah, this all works beautifully. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, that there is the start of my list of my top 50 games of all time, and we're going to be wrapping up this list over the course of this week because, obviously, we have got ourselves a brand new series starting next week, but I needed, just a tiny bit of extra time to get that all ready for you, so that's why we're doing this as a bit of a special event this week. So, yes indeed, join me tomorrow as we crack on with more of the list. There are some big names to come, some more surprises too, and of course, at some point, we've got to get to a Fallout game or two. So, where's everything going to end up? Join me over the course of this week, and we shall flipping see. But in the meantime, I've been John, this has been Many a True Nerd, and this has been my top games of all time. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Wait, and flamethrower! 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 Okay, so this is definitely morally questionable. The point where you start singing the flamethrower song, potentially you've gone over the line.